Hello and welcome to Son of a Glitch. Join us as we explore some of the internet's craziest glitch stories. Story 1. When I was around 10 years old, I frequently experienced vivid, ultra-realistic dreams, often lucid ones, though I didn't know that term back then. I just assumed everyone had dreams where they were fully aware and in control. I never really brought it up because it felt completely ordinary to me. However, there was one recurring dream during those early years that stood out from the rest. It happened nearly every night for a span of a couple of years. Each time, the dream began the same way. I was sitting in our old living room, holding a glass of orange juice. The room had that dated floral wallpaper, a clunky CRT television, and my mom's worn-out couch with a burn hole in the center cushion, a mark left by my brother when he accidentally set it on fire. In the dream, my brother was always in his room, so it was just me and my mom watching television together. The TV would always be showing a shuttle launch. I had a deep fascination with those as a kid. I remember watching the rocket lift off, completely absorbed, when the phone would ring. I always found that part annoying because it interrupted the launch. My mom would go into the kitchen to answer the call, and every time, it was my grandmother on the line. I'd glance over at my mom and see her bright expression turn into one of shock and sadness. My grandma would be telling her that my grandpa had suffered a heart attack and was being rushed to the hospital. The dream would usually end with my mom hanging up and telling me we had to leave right away. What was strange about this particular dream was that, unlike my other lucid dreams, I couldn't control anything that happened. No matter how many times I had it, it always caught me off guard. After a couple of years, the dream eventually faded, and I stopped thinking about it, mostly because it left me feeling uneasy. Fast forward to my 21st birthday. My brother and I were visiting our mom for a low-key celebration. I was sitting in the same living room, this time holding a root beer instead of orange juice. My mom was in the kitchen making dinner, and my brother was in his old room, just like in the dream. The room had changed over the years, of course. The wallpaper had been updated and the TV was newer, but it still felt like the same place. As I shifted on the couch, my hand brushed against that familiar burn hole in the cushion, and suddenly a wave of nervous energy hit my stomach. It felt like anxiety, but not quite. Then the news switched to a segment celebrating the 10th anniversary of a shuttle launch. I can't recall which launch it was, but as they showed footage of the rocket rising into the sky, I was hit with a powerful sense of déjà vu. Chills ran down my spine. Almost involuntarily, I turned to my mom and quietly said, "Hey Mom, the phone's going to ring. It'll be Grandma. She's going to say Grandpa had a heart attack. We need to prepare ourselves." My mom gave me a confused, worried look and started to ask what I meant, but before she could finish, the phone rang. She stared at it for a moment, then slowly picked it up. And just like in the dream, her expression changed. After a short conversation, she told us we needed to get to the hospital. The ride there was silent. My brother was unaware of what had happened before the call, but I could feel my mom trying to figure out how I had known. Later, while we were at the hospital visiting my grandfather, my mom pulled me aside and asked me point blank, "Is he going to make it?" Without hesitation, I shook my head and said, "No, he's going to pass away overnight due to complications." I had no idea how I knew that part. It had never been part of the dream, but I felt completely certain. She nodded, took a deep breath, and returned to his room. She spent the next few hours talking to him, reminiscing, and asking him questions. It was a bittersweet, heartfelt moment. Sadly, just as I had said, he passed away in the early morning hours. Strangely, I think telling my mom ahead of time helped her cope with the news. She was able to accept it more easily than I would have ever expected. We went back to support my grandma, and we all managed to stay strong for her. My mom and I never spoke about how I knew, and I'm thankful for that because I wouldn't have had an explanation. That dream was the only one of its kind, something that felt more like a premonition than a dream. It haunted my childhood for years, only to come true more than a decade later. I still don't understand why I had it or why I couldn't change anything about it. I can't say for certain what it was, but if I had to put a label on it, I'd say it felt like a glitch in reality, like I was given a glimpse of the future by whatever system governs this existence. It was deeply unsettling, but also strangely meaningful. I hope I never have an experience like that again, but I'm grateful for the one I had. Story 2. In 2006, something happened to me that I still struggle to talk about, an event I've buried deep for years because of the emotional weight it carries. It was more than strange. It changed the course of my life. I suppose if you're reading this, it deserves to be shared. For context, I was raised by my grandparents from birth. My grandmother and I were incredibly close. She was my constant, my foundation. Around this time, I was in college, but life had taken a harsh turn. I had been in a serious car accident caused by a group of high school girls who were skipping school. The crash forced me to drop out, declare bankruptcy, and eventually enlist in the military just to survive. After my service, I returned home, became a police officer and EMT, got married, had kids, divorced, and later returned to college to finish my degree. It was a long, hard road. As a single parent to 2 small children, ages 3 and 5, I moved back in with my grandparents to finish my remaining semesters. My grandparents had also raised my cousin, who was 16 at the time. His mother, my aunt, though more like a big sister, still lived in Iowa. That's where we had all grown up before relocating to Illinois. I had made the 468-mile trip between the 2 states countless times over 20 years. In 2006, our spring breaks aligned. My cousin's from high school, mine from college. My grandmother asked me if I could take him to Iowa to visit his mom. It sounded like a great idea. The kids and I could use a little break, and I could catch up with old friends from high school. The Saturday before we left, I renewed my Advanced Cardiac Life Support (ACLS) certification. It was an easy one-day refresher, and I kept it current from my days as an EMT. That detail, though it seemed minor at the time, would come to haunt me. We were scheduled to leave Friday, March 10th, 2006. That morning was chaotic. I hadn't packed for myself or the kids, my financial aid check had just hit, and I received an unexpected child support payment, one that only came because my ex had recently been arrested. Between my cousin's teenage impatience, my kids' needs, and the last-minute rushing, I was frazzled. In the shuffle, I nearly forgot to say goodbye. I stopped just before leaving, went back into the living room, kissed my grandmother on the cheek, and told her I loved her. The drive to Iowa went smoothly. But during our stay, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. My aunt and I went shopping in Omaha. I visited old friends, took the kids around, but something kept tugging at me. A heaviness. A pull. By Monday, I decided to cut the trip short and drive back with the kids on Wednesday, March 15th. My cousin would return with his mom later that week. But before I left, my grandmother asked me on the phone if I had gotten her the purse she wanted. I hadn't. So Tuesday, my aunt and I made another trip to Omaha, found the purse, and prepared to leave the next morning. That's when everything went sideways. We left on March 15th. Several hours into the drive, on a highway I knew like the back of my hand, one I had driven hundreds of times, I suddenly realized I had no idea where I was. The signs didn't match the route. I pulled over at a gas station and asked the attendant where we were. I was stunned when he told me I was in Missouri, not Iowa or Illinois. Somehow, without making a single turn, I had ended up hours away from where I should have been, heading in the wrong direction. That 7-hour drive took me 13.5 hours. I had a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old in the back seat. I was navigating unfamiliar roads with an old-school road atlas, exhausted and increasingly distressed. Around 1 a.m., I arrived in a town just 45 minutes from home. I couldn't go any farther, so I stayed at a friend's house for the night. The next morning, I was slow to get moving, still shaken, still trying to process how I had ended up in Missouri. My grandmother called me, oddly eager for me to return. "Hurry back," she said. "I need your help with the fish tank, and I can't wait to see my new purse." Those were the last words she ever said to me. As I left my friend's house, I called home to let them know I would be there in about 45 minutes. My grandfather answered, something he never did, and his voice was trembling. "Your grandmother," she collapsed in the kitchen. "The paramedics are working on her." He hadn't called anyone else yet. I told him I would, and I raced to pick up my mom and get to the hospital. We arrived 30 minutes before the ambulance did. My grandfather had tried CPR, something he had never done before, and with his own breathing issues, he could barely manage. The paramedics had to keep stopping the ambulance to shock her heart again and again. She had suffered a massive heart attack. She died the next day, March 17th, 2006, from brain damage due to lack of oxygen. And here's the part that still breaks me. If I hadn't gotten lost, if I hadn't somehow glitched into Missouri, I would have been home. I had just renewed my advanced CPR certification. I could have saved her. To this day, I don't understand how I ended up in Missouri. I didn't make any turns. I didn't take any wrong exits. I couldn't have. The highway was straight. I didn't detour. I didn't sleep. I wasn't distracted. It was as if I had been rerouted by something beyond me, by the universe, by fate, by a glitch in the system. And for what reason? To prevent me from being there? I don't know. But those 3 days, March 15th, 16, and 17, are etched into my memory deeper than any others. They are the worst I've ever lived. Story 3. This story took place just a few months ago in July, when my husband and I made a weekend trip to visit friends in eastern Washington. They had recently finished building a beautiful home on the Columbia River, and we were excited to spend the evening there. There were 10 of us total: our hosts, their daughter and her husband, the daughter's friend and her husband, and a few other guests. It was a relaxed, social gathering. A few days before the trip, I had gone to Target to pick up food and drinks to bring along. Among the items, I bought a bottle of Chateau Saint Michel Rose, a wine I was looking forward to enjoying. I had initially left it on the counter for a day or two, then placed it in the refrigerator the night before we were set to leave. On the morning of the trip, my husband, I'll call him Chris, was busy packing the cooler and loading the car, while I did one last check of the fridge. I noticed that he had already packed the flavored water and cider, but left the wine. So I grabbed it along with my water bottle and tossed it into a canvas bag, placing it on the back seat of the SUV, since the cooler was already full. We arrived at our friend's home around 4 p.m. The scenery was stunning: rolling hills, the river glistening, and a breezy summer atmosphere. We initially left all our things in the car and took a tour of the house. Later, Chris unloaded our cooler and overnight bags. He didn't know I had put the wine bottle in the back seat, so I made a mental note to grab it later and chill it in the fridge. That evening, one of the guests, let's call her Beth, offered some homemade mixed drinks. I had two, spacing them out with plenty of water in between since it was a hot day. After dinner, 6 of us decided to take a short golf cart ride around the neighborhood. When we returned, I remembered the wine bottle still sitting in the back of the car, so I walked over, opened the door, pulled the bottle out of the canvas bag, and went inside. The house had a French door refrigerator. Since the bottle was tall, it wouldn't fit well on the shelves, so I rearranged some items in the left side door compartment and placed the wine next to a mason jar of something homemade. Then I went outside and joined everyone in the hot tub. We stayed in the hot tub for several hours, then showered and gathered around the fire pit until about 2 a.m. It was a lovely night, full of laughter and conversation. Eventually, we all turned in. The next morning, while we were packing up to leave, I realized I never opened the bottle of wine. Since our hosts didn't drink wine, I figured I'd take it back home with us. I opened the fridge to retrieve it, and it was gone. Not just missing, but there was no sign that it had ever been there. The door shelf was full of other items, but the spot where I had placed the bottle was completely occupied by things I didn't recognize. Confused, I asked Chris if he had packed it up already. He looked puzzled and said he didn't even know I brought wine with us. I checked the trash. No empty bottle, no cork, no discarded label. No one else had been drinking wine that night. In fact, nobody even mentioned wine, not even me. I thought maybe I had imagined it, but I remembered the distinct feel of the bottle in my hand, the sound of the fridge door opening, and the way I moved things around to make space. We drove the 3 hours home, and when we arrived, Chris told me to leave the unpacking to him. I grabbed only my purse and water bottle and went inside. I opened our fridge to place the water bottle back, and there it was. The same bottle of Chateau Saint Michel Rose, sitting on the shelf like it had never left. I stood there in disbelief. We live alone. No one else had access to our fridge. The bottle couldn't have been a second one. I even checked my Target order history to confirm I had only purchased one. I remembered specifically choosing not to buy a second because I figured one would be enough. Wanting to make sense of it, I contacted our friends and asked if they had any surveillance footage. They had a camera facing the driveway, and I asked them to check if I was seen carrying a bottle of wine into the house that night. They reviewed the footage and told me, "We don't see you with a bottle at all." It was the strangest part of all. I have a vivid memory of holding the wine, walking across the driveway, setting it on the kitchen counter, and placing it in the fridge, but no one saw it. There was no evidence. It was like the act had occurred in my mind, but not in reality. I've considered every possible explanation. Did I astral project? Did I shift timelines? Or was this wine bottle quite literally teleported from one fridge to another? I don't have a logical answer, but the memory is crystal clear, and the bottle was undeniably in our fridge when we got home. Whatever happened, it was as if the universe folded in on itself for a moment and rearranged something as simple as a bottle of rose. Story 4. At the time, I was around 8 or 9 years old. My dad worked as an attorney in a fairly ordinary 4-story office building. His office was on the 4th floor, and every Friday after school, my mom would pick up my siblings and me, and we'd stop by his office before heading out for dinner as a family. It became a routine. Dad would meet us there, and then we'd all go eat, even though it meant he and my mom had to drive separately. I had 2 siblings back then, a baby brother and an older sister, and I was in a phase where I was obsessed with doing everything independently. Cooking, laundry, homework, I wanted to do it all myself. But my biggest personal mission at the time was to ride the elevator alone. I loved pressing the buttons, watching the doors open and close, and feeling like I was navigating the building by myself. One particular Friday afternoon followed the usual script. My mom picked us up, took us to the office, and I ran around the halls while my dad wrapped up work. Eventually, my mom told me it was time to go, and I bolted toward the elevator like I always did. She and my dad knew there was no use trying to ride down with me. I insisted on doing it solo. They just told me to wait for them on the 1st floor. I stepped inside the elevator, but the moment the doors closed, something felt off. A heavy sense of dread settled in my stomach. It wasn't anxiety exactly, just a deep, instinctual feeling that I needed to get out immediately. But I was too slow to act, and the elevator had already started moving. In my flustered state, I accidentally pressed the button for the 4th floor, which was the floor I was already on. That should have just reopened the doors, right? Instead, the elevator kept going up. It rose for what felt like 30 to 45 seconds, far longer than it should have, given that the building only had 4 floors. When the doors finally opened, I was staring at what looked like the 4th floor, but it wasn't. Everything was subtly wrong. The frosted glass panels were now crystal clear. The floor wasn't carpeted but tiled. The walls had gone from a dull gray to a pale green. And most unsettling of all, the company logo, my dad's law firm, was nowhere to be seen. It was like I had stepped into a nearly identical building in a parallel world. I just stood there frozen. I didn't move, didn't breathe. I scanned the space, trying to make sense of it. After a few minutes, a janitor pushing a vacuum noticed me. He seemed kind and walked over to ask if I was lost. "Where are your parents?" he asked. "Do you need help?" All I could say was, "I'm lost." He suggested I come over to the reception desk so they could call around the building. I almost followed him. I was just about to take a step forward when that overwhelming feeling returned, this time stronger. Something inside me screamed, "Stay in the elevator. Do not leave." I shook my head and told him I was just going to ride down to the 1st floor to wait for my parents. He agreed to ride with me, so I wouldn't be alone. We rode down in silence, and when the doors opened again, there were my parents waiting in the lobby. They immediately hugged me, and I broke down crying. Through tears, I tried to explain what I saw, how the floor looked different, how it wasn't the same place. My dad just gave me a confused look and said, "That's not possible. All the floors have the same layout." Desperate for someone to believe me, I told them to ask the janitor, the man who had seen me and rode down with me. My mom looked at me with concern and said, "What janitor? You were the only one on that elevator." I couldn't believe it. The man who had spoken to me, who had ridden down with me, simply didn't exist in their version of events. After that, I refused to ride that elevator alone ever again. I avoided it for 2 years until my dad changed jobs. I was so shaken, so disturbed, that I developed a full-blown fear of elevators until I was a teenager. To this day, I'm convinced I somehow slipped into a parallel version of the building, a version where things were just a little bit different. And I often wonder what would have happened if I had stepped out of that elevator and followed the janitor. Would I have been able to come back? I still don't know, but I'll never forget what I saw, and I'll never stop wondering what, or where, that place really was. Story 5. A few years ago, one of my online friends got a new PC. I know this happened, not just because I remember her posting excitedly about it on Facebook, but because I literally connected to it remotely to help her set things up. I saw her specs, helped her configure some stuff, and even remember thinking how nice of an upgrade it was compared to the old laptop she used to complain about. We don't really talk consistently anymore, but we still message each other occasionally to catch up. About 6 months ago was the last time we spoke, until just the other day, when I reached out and asked if she wanted to play some Minecraft with me. She joined me, and we played for a bit like we used to together. Nowadays, I'm really into VR chat, so I asked if she'd want to try it out with me and some of my other friends sometime. She said she couldn't. Her laptop is like 10 years old and can't run it. I was confused, so I said, "Wait, didn't you get a new PC a while back?" And she just said, "No, I never did." I thought she was messing with me at first. But no, she genuinely acted like it never happened. I even went back to try to find the Facebook post she made about it, and it's gone. No pictures, no comments, no sign it was ever there. The only thing I could find is a post about her new desk, which she got at the same time as her PC. But I remember helping her set it up. I remember what the post said. I remember checking her specs myself. And now nothing. I'm honestly extremely confused regarding the whole situation. Story 6. I'm in my room with the door shut, and I hear the toilet light go on, and the door shut. I figure out that my Annie is in there. The toilet flushes, and I hear my Annie goes downstairs, then comes back up again and goes to the toilet. The light goes on, and the door shuts. At this point I'm thinking, she must have the weakest bladder in existence. Then 10 minutes passes. I go out to see if she's still in there, and the door is still shut. She's still in there, and I'm thinking it's a long job, so I sit and wait for her to leave. Then 15 minutes pass, and she's still in there. I'm thinking she's obviously got a bad stomach or something and just wait. Then she comes in my room, and I'm like, "Are you okay? You've been in the toilet for the last 20 minutes. She says she's been downstairs for the last 20 minutes, and that she never went to the toilet the second time. The door is still shut, and I didn't hear anyone come out. I heard someone come up the stairs and go back into the toilet, and yet no one ever went the second time. Story 6. I have 2 experiences that might seem small on the surface, but they've left me questioning how reality actually works. I've never been able to explain them, and thinking about them still gives me that unsettled feeling, like the world isn't quite as stable as we believe it is. The first incident happened at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. I was flying home from college, as I often did, and always flew the same airline, through the same terminal at the same gate. I knew this terminal like the back of my hand. When I first started flying, the terminal was old and a little rundown, and the bathrooms were honestly the worst part, small, outdated, and with barely functioning stall locks. The doors had huge gaps, and the whole setup was uncomfortable. Thankfully, within my first year of traveling, the entire terminal was renovated. It became sleek and modern, and the bathrooms were transformed, floor-to-ceiling stalls, clean surfaces, and an overall more comfortable design. One time, after the renovations were complete, I arrived at my usual gate and decided to head to the restroom. But when I walked in, it was the old bathroom. The outdated stalls, the same dingy tile, the same broken locks. I was so confused. I stepped back out, thinking maybe I had walked into a different terminal by mistake. But no, I was exactly where I always flew from. I even looked around to confirm the gate and signage. Everything else was new and modern, except for the bathroom. I used the restroom quickly and got out, still feeling disoriented. When I flew back a week later through the same gate, the bathroom was back to its renovated state. I stood there for a long moment, just staring, wondering what in the world I had stepped into a week earlier. It was like I had walked into the past for just a few minutes, only to come back to the present without warning. The second story happened around Christmas of 2021. My siblings and I were all home for the holidays, one of the rare times we were all together since we were in different colleges and grad schools. My sister and I were in her room, wrapping presents with the door shut to keep gifts a surprise. We had a system. One person wrapped while the other held down paper or handed over tape and scissors. It was fun, just 2 sisters catching up, laughing, enjoying the moment. At one point, I handed her the scissors so she could cut the wrapping paper. She did, then set them down beside her so she could grab her phone and show me a picture of someone. We finished wrapping that gift, set it aside, and I pulled out the next item to wrap. When I asked her to hand me the scissors, she reached to her side and froze. They weren't there. She said maybe she had handed them back to me already. I looked around on the floor. Nothing. I lifted the wrapping paper, thinking they got hidden under it. Still nothing. We both felt confused, but started searching more aggressively. We looked under the bed, on top of the nightstand, even under the dresser. Nothing. We unwrapped the last gift we had wrapped just in case they got accidentally included, but the scissors weren't inside. At this point, both of us were feeling really uneasy. It didn't make sense. We'd just used them. Then our brother knocked and came in. We explained the situation, and he joined the search. All 3 of us spent another 30 minutes tearing apart the room. Still nothing. Eventually, feeling defeated, we went downstairs to tell our mom. We must have looked ridiculous, 3 grown adults, completely baffled over a missing pair of scissors. She followed us upstairs and, of course, the first thing she did was lift up the wrapping paper we had already searched under multiple times. And there they were, just sitting there, as if they had never been missing at all. All three of us were stunned. That was the exact spot where we had looked at least 3 times. We had even unrolled the paper, shaken it, and smoothed it out. There was no way those scissors were there the whole time. We still talk about that day sometimes. It probably sounds silly to anyone else, just a pair of missing scissors, but we know what we experienced. Something shifted, even if just slightly. And for a few minutes, those scissors were gone from our reality.